some really cool stuff to share with you all. Most of you have heard me mention him before on the Adapt and Overcome podcast, but here he is in person. And today we'll be speaking specifically everything fat, diet related, how to lose the fat, how to keep it off, all that stuff. And Mr. Bill will be addressing it from his perspective, which is probably better than my own. So Bill, hello, how are you? And who are you?
I am good. Thank you for inviting me back on your podcast. I am a professor of exercise science at the University of South Florida, which is in Tampa, Florida. And there, my research focuses in two broad areas: sports nutrition and physique enhancement. Most of my work's in the physique enhancement realm, which I kind of describe that as the vanity side of the profession. There's a lot of exercise scientists that are more focused on health, longevity, so things that are more important than losing a little extra body fat or trying to build a little extra muscle just for vanity reasons. But nonetheless, that is where my interests lie. That is my passion. That's why I believe I was created to do this line of work. So that's what I do. My laboratory is the Performance and Physique Enhancement Laboratory. And as you alluded to, my lab does research on some usually diets, always a resistance training aspect to what we do, sometimes dietary supplements and their impact on fat loss or their failure to induce fat loss, as is the case sometimes. We also do just some straight up resistance training studies, like programming stuff to maximize muscle mass. And I also mentioned sports nutrition. It's been a few years since I've done true sports nutrition research. I'm more in my lane with physique enhancement stuff, but I like sports nutrition. I like improving performance. Just an update on what my lab is doing. We are finishing a fat loss supplement study where we're looking at the effects of a fat loss supplement, a thermogenic supplement. And what I like about this study is we're measuring the effects that it has on elevating resting energy expenditure, or RMR. And we're doing this with a caffeinated version of the supplement and a non-caffeinated version of the supplement. I'm under the impression that most fat loss supplements, it's just the caffeine that's doing anything, at least in terms of increasing metabolic rate. So we're actually testing that in my lab this semester. The second thing that we're doing is we're starting a systematic review and meta-analysis on concurrent training. So for anybody that's not familiar with concurrent training, that's where you have somebody who's resistance training. It's kind of like their foundation exercise program. And then you add in aerobic exercise or cardio on top of that. Now, historically, all of the interest and all of the other research has really been focused on the interference effect. And what that's asking is, do you limit your ability to gain muscle when you add in cardio to resistance training? What my lab's going to do, I think we're going to be the first team to do this. We're looking at the fat loss effects of added cardio to resistance exercise. So we're really excited to doing that. My lab's getting training right now in learning this research skills of a meta-analysis systematic review. And then one more thing, from a personal standpoint, I recently launched my first product. It's a research review. It's called Body by Science. And what I do in that is every month I summarize 2 research articles, and I summarize them in a way that for people who don't have time to read the research, or for people who really don't understand how to read research, I break it down in a manner that you will understand it. And it's solely focused on fat loss and building muscle. And you're a subscriber. You were one of the first people, so thank you for supporting my work. My goal is that every fitness professional in the world would have it. So I price it. My launch price is $6.99. I'm hoping that's low enough that there's not a financial barrier to subscribing to it. And if anybody is interested in that, just go to my website. It's billcampbellphd.com, and you can get the inaugural issue for free just to see if it's something that you like. And if you do, you can get it. I roll out a new issue every month, usually the middle of the month. And yeah, that's what's going on with me.
All right, well, you heard it from the man. He is pretty amazing, but he's humble and won't admit it. He knows a lot, probably more than I do, about most things related to the subject. and we're going to be talking about fat loss. So just in the kind of the same vein as to what you were just talking about, do you have any recommendations for fat loss supplements that actually work and are over the counter?
I think the most effective fat loss supplement is caffeine. It works on a lot of different levels. It's cheap, it's safe unless you overdose. I think it's a highly effective fat loss supplement. Now, when I say that, when I go on a diet, do I take caffeine? No, I don't. So even though I know it's effective, even though I know it would help me, I don't like relying on it. I like just letting my diet and my exercise be the primary drivers. Now, if I were a bodybuilder preparing for a competition, I know I would rely on caffeine. Now, I don't know how much we want to get into it, but I can talk about some of the different mechanisms. Another supplement that's also effective is Yohimbene. That is, there's a little bit more risk with Yohimbene. Most people tolerate it well, but there's a certain subset of people who shouldn't take it. But the research, there's not a lot, but the research that exists on Yohimbene is fairly robust in that it causes fat loss, particularly in already lean people, which kind of is my audience. So that's interesting that some research suggests it works that one and maybe not as well in obese individuals.
Now, what are your thoughts on, well, I should mention, by the way, that when it comes to caffeine, just make sure you guys don't take it up to 7 hours before your bedtime. So you know what time you're going to bed. Try to take it, your last dose of caffeine, if you will, about 7 hours before bed. And caffeine, of course, is in sodas and chocolate and these things. So just be cautious of that or you won't be sleeping. If you're not sleeping, you're not going to be rested. You're not going to be growing. And when it comes to fat loss, guess what? You're going to be releasing more of that ghrelin, the hunger hormone. So yeah, you're going to be hungry the next day. So make sure you're sleeping. Caffeine, not good if it keeps you awake all night, not as productive. I just wanted to get that out of the way. But what are your thoughts on caffeine in the context of the EAC stack? I'm not sure if you know what that is.
Yeah. So I did a bodybuilding show when I was younger, so many years ago, and I used that exact stack. So it's ephedrine, caffeine, and I use baby aspirin. I think it was like 81 milligrams. I thought it worked great. So ephedrine is highly effective. Really thought that worked. I don't even know if can you get it legally now? I don't know.
Well, I guess I'll share a little trade secret here I use with my clients. It's illegal. It's actually illegal because in the 60s, a baseball player who was like 300 pounds took a ridiculous amount of it and had a heart attack on the field. But as far as I know, it's actually one of the only actual proven fat loss supplements. And when taken with the caffeine and aspirin, I mean, I'll let you talk about that, but it works really well. And you can legally get it if you go to a pharmacy and you ask for something called Broncaid. It's an asthma.
Yes, I remember that.
Asthma medication, and you can get it inside of that. Just make sure you have your license, because you get like 100 of these things, you can make heroin or something. I don't know about that, but something along those lines. But what do you think about it?
As a fat loss supplement, it's highly effective. It's probably more effective than caffeine. But there were, like you said, some case studies. And again, I would also suggest, like Yohimbene, there's certain people that shouldn't take it. I tolerated it well. I'll never forget when I was young in my early 20s, I was of the mindset that more is better. And I had never taken ephedrine before. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you're old enough. Do you remember Twin Lab, the supplement company? So they had a supplement that was an ECA stack, essentially. It was called Twin Fuel. I think that's what it was called. And I think the recommended dosage was like 2 supplements. Again, I'm not recommending people do this. I took like 6 or 8. I'm like, nothing really works for me. I'll never forget that night. I was sitting on my couch in my apartment. I could feel my heart pounding. And I just remember thinking, I'm going to die. And that's when I came to the conclusion, this stuff works. Whatever ephedrine is. Again, I was young, ignorant. You can call me stupid. I was all of those things. But I learned, man, ephedrine, it does something. So yeah, if you look at the research, pretty effective for fat loss. There are some side effects that people get more so with that than just caffeine, but it's also a lot more effective than caffeine, in my opinion.
The reason it works so good in conjunction with the caffeine and aspirin is caffeine basically just speeds up your heart rate, etc., with all the other additional fat burning effects it has. The baby aspirin kind of thins out your blood a little bit, and the ephedrine acts as a bronchial tube dilator, and that's why it all works so effectively. I'm laughing because I don't know. I mean, how many times I did that? That means so many times because I would be doing bodybuilding plus I was a chef. I'd be working 18 hours a day. You wouldn't notice what time it was, so I would take one at like 8 o'clock at night, and and I should mention just in relation to the health performance, but also just kind of life quality. When it comes to things like this caffeine and these fat burners, they affect your mood. And don't let anybody tell you different. You will have more anxiety. You will have less patience. You'll be more irritable. You'll be more aggressive. I mean, I'm a super calm, chill guy. I smoke weed all day. And if I have something like an EAC stack, I have to be careful that I don't like get like a spike of aggression or really annoyed for no apparent reason. I'm just kind of cautious of it because I know it could happen. It's happened many times before to me. It happens to everybody who takes these things because it affects you. So just caution with that, guys. Just like to say caution with that. Always, you really don't need much for these things to be effective. A single dose taken in the morning is more than enough for most people. I just like to get that out of the way. But anyways, what else you got for fat burning? Well,
I'm not really optimistic on anything else that's that's safe and legal. I mean, there's DNP, which apparently is highly effective, but it can also give you cataracts and kind of cook you in a couple hours. And that's, I mean, obviously an illegal drug. And I remember you mentioned anxiety with some of these supplements. That's the one thing that Yohimbene, that's a counter argument. If you're an anxious person to begin with, Yohimbene would definitely be on your do not take list because it amplifies anxiety. So that's one thing that was pretty consistent in the research literature. And I just remember you talked about being like amping you up. I used to stock shelves. I would stock shelves at these warehouses, and what I would stock were like 6-gallon boxes. So there was 6 gallons in these boxes, and I would, on a normal day, I'd struggle to get it over my head and stock these shelves. The same day that I was on my couch, when I got home and I felt my heart pounding, I had worked for about 4 hours prior to that. Those boxes never felt so light in my life. I was like twirling them, not literally, but figuratively twirling them on my finger. Yes, again, you can appreciate. It was a day I'll never forget when I took 3 times as much ephedrine, caffeine, aspirin than what the recommended dosage was. And I've never taken cocaine, but I have to think that's probably what cocaine makes you feel like.
Well, it's a very similar effect to an amphetamine, also very similar to meth, actually. In all seriousness, like I don't know if you know this, but meth heads, one of the things they're known for is they'll go home and they'll like clean the shit out of their house for like 9 hours.
I've heard that.
Clean the shit because so, I mean, maybe it's not all bad, but I'm touching illegally here, I suppose, but only in America. Just because you brought up the memory here, I had a friend. He wasn't a bodybuilder or anything; he was just a normal guy, and he used to always have me get a clenbuterol for him. Not because he wanted to lose fat; he was skinny. He just liked how it made him feel. He liked that feeling. So now clenbuterol is a little bit like ephedrine. You want to chat about that for a second?
Yeah, so I don't have a lot of knowledge on that. I know it's a very popular fat loss drug in bodybuilding circles, particularly bikini female circles. So it's I think it's very common in veterinary care for horses. I don't know what the purpose is for horses, but in humans, I don't know if it's also a bronchodilator, but it's very effective for fat loss. Speeds up your metabolic rate. I think it has effects on your thyroid as well. So again, I don't have a lot of knowledge like I do, the supplements that I've actually studied, but I know it's popular and I know it's effective.
I think, at least as far as I know, that's all the ones I would bother talking about because I mean, you might want to not hear this, but most of those fat burners on the shelves, I mean, they're really nothing going on there. They're not really effective. They're not really going to help you. The main thing is you have to be in a calorie deficit and you got to be eating enough protein mainly. So you want to chat about, let's just say, I hate dieting because I'm not a fan of saying the word, you have to diet to get the fat off because not a really good idea to do that. But what about changing your lifestyle so you can slowly remove fat, like half a pound or so a week? You don't have to. This doesn't mean exercise program. This doesn't mean I'm radically shifting my life. It just means I want to lose some weight, and the easiest way to do it is to kind of start eating like this. So what would be your recommendations, maybe your key points?
Yeah, so if you want to start with the least impact on your lifestyle, and this is especially effective in people who aren't already currently fitness enthusiasts. So somebody's more of a beginner, and they're not exercising, they're not in control of their calories, or they don't really know what's going on. If they do nothing else other than add protein into their diet, that alone, not even reducing carbs and fat, that changes their body composition, even without resistance exercise. We can look at all of the overfeeding studies. And when it's protein, it just has this ability to change your body shape. Now, normally what happens, at least in my observation, people consciously increase their protein. They will lower their carbs to some extent. So at the end of the day, they're kind of at a neutral caloric intake. So what we've done is we've not told them to diet. They didn't diet because they're eating the same amount of calories by the definition of diet, but yet they are going to see changes in their physiques. It happened. My wife, when we were dating, that's exactly what she was already lifting weights, but we just made one simple change to her diet. Man, she tightened up. She was already lean, but she got leaner. Shoulders were popping more. And I was young when that happened. I'm like, so I have all these memories of what started to form some of my opinions. And then I get into the research and I'm like, oh, well, the research supports this as well. So there's a great strategy where if you're working with a client that's new, you don't want to throw the kitchen sink at somebody who's new. It's tough enough just to start, whether you're trying to be aware of protein or you're starting an exercise program. So that's an easy thing to do that has pretty relatively quick impacts on what your body looks like. Once you've done that, then at that point, if your goal is to lose fat, there's really two options. You can increase exercise. And I want to talk about just my philosophy on exercise for fat loss. And then your other option is to reduce your calories, to be in a caloric deficit. And of course, there's a lot of different strategies in how to do that. The one thing that I guess I'll just call it my philosophy is I don't like using resistance exercise as a fat loss strategy.
100%.
Yeah, and I think a lot of beginners do that. So if you think of your heartbeat, your heart's constantly beating, right? So that, to me, that's what your resistance training program is to your life. There won't be a time in your life when you're not resistance training. So don't increase it, don't decrease it for the purposes of fat loss. Now, maybe there's other reasons to increase or decrease your volume or intensity, but it's just a staple. It's kind of like this, it's just the heartbeat of your life. And if you want to exercise for fat loss, aerobic exercise, cardio, is highly effective for that. We talked about supplements. Cardio burns fat well. Now, that doesn't mean it's for everybody. I don't like cardio per se. I guess I walk now more than anything when I do my cardio.
If I may, Bill, I want to interject before people start getting afraid of this, because every time somebody hears the word cardio, they get it wrong. Would you mind maybe just discussing some of the most beneficial forms of cardio for fat loss? And when I say most, I mean, it's not running, it's not sprinting. These are not like effective ways to lose fat, especially not for a beginner. My opinion, I mean, maybe give me your take on this, is walking at a slight incline at a low speed for a consistent period of time. And when you get off, you should not be exhausted. You should not be covered in sweat. You should not have difficulty speaking. You should be well below that range. You should get off. You should be like, oh, that was rough, but I could totally do that again tomorrow. Something along those lines. You should be able to have a conversation. You can listen to a podcast. This shouldn't be a strenuous cardio, because that kind of cardio actually primarily burns glucose, not so much the fat. But I mean, I'll let you get into that if you don't.
Yeah, that's the kind of cardio that I do mostly. Just as a lifestyle decision, I try to run a mile once a week with my daughter. So I am running. But I would say what I tell people is now I'm very, very biased towards low bars. So if somebody likes to do inline skating, if they love rollerblading, then I'm going to say rollerblade. If you love swimming, then swim. If you hate running, then don't run. But for most people that are a little averse to cardio, like myself, what you just said, I think is perfect because it doesn't feel like cardio. You're not huffing and puffing and, like you said, sweating. Now I sweat in Florida when it's outside, but it's a great way to increase. And there's also health benefits to it, but it's a great way to increase your caloric expenditure, put you in a caloric deficit without necessarily getting all of the the ratings of perceived exertion, which can be quite high. But again, there are people in this world that love running, or they love cycling, or they love being on the elliptical, or even the stair stepper. That's not for me. So again, heavily influenced or biased by do what you like, you're going to stick to it longer, than have at it. But cardio in general, so I'll just categorize it as whatever's getting your heart rate higher, whatever that is for you, that is a great supplement to your resistance training program to induce fat loss. Now, I don't think that, and I want to be careful because you say that to a lot of people and they become what I call, or what some people call, cardio bunnies, because they just want to lose fat. That's not the intent here. If you want to have a body that's sculpted, cardio is not going to accomplish that. It doesn't matter how much you do. You can become a smaller version of yourself as you lose body fat, but you're not changing the shape of your body. You're just a smaller, same version of yourself, if that's how you're going to do it. That's why resistance training, if you want a sculpted body, you want some muscle definition, resistance training is the only mode of exercise that's going to sculpt your body. But if the focus is fat loss, again, you have two options: caloric deficit or increased cardio exercise. And we're assuming that resistance training is just a staple. It's the heartbeat of your life in terms of your exercise. So I envision this, to me, it's kind of like almost a game. If I'm working with a client, okay, what do you like better? Do you like dieting? Do you want to reduce your calories, or do you want to do some extra treadmill walking at an incline? Like, what do you prefer? And start there. And for most people, they don't prefer cardio, at least not the people that I work with. So we'll start with a caloric deficit, then maybe over time we'll add in cardio, then maybe we take a diet break. Like, you have all of these options. That's why, I mean, you're living the life that I don't live right now, but I'm somewhat jealous of. You work with clients and you get to use all of your knowledge, and then your relation with your client, getting to know them, and you have all these tools at your disposal, and you're just helping and prodding, and let's try this. And you approach it as a scientist. So, hey, that didn't work. Okay, let's move to this. That's how I envision the fat loss process. Cardio is your big tool. A caloric deficit's your big tool. How do we combine these to the lifestyle of the client to get the biggest buck in terms of fat loss?
100%. And I would also say, you guys have heard me say this before, but guess what? The heart is actually the most important muscle on the body. It ain't your bicep. It's not your quads or your abs. Your heart isn't a strong muscle. You'd die. So maybe we should work the heart a little bit minimum. But anyways, I love what you said. Is the same thing I say to all my clients, is whatever cardio you enjoy is cardio. Now, that being said, there's obviously some cardio, which you shouldn't be doing if you have, say, this goal. Doesn't make sense to be doing this kind of cardio. If you want to be a long distance runner, don't do sprinting. I mean, I think this is kind of an obvious thing. But I just like to get that out of the way. And I would also like to say that when it comes to the calorie deficit or increasing cardio, it might be a little bit misunderstood, because the calorie deficit you can get from food. The main goal of the cardio is also to create that calorie deficit as well. But to put it in perspective for you guys, I mean, this morning I was on the treadmill for, I think it was about 45 minutes, just a moderate incline. I do my video editing while I'm on the treadmill. It's really easy for me. I think I burned, it was like 240 calories. Now, to put that in perspective for you, if I got off the treadmill and then I ate 2 Reese's cups, those 2 little peanut butter cups, that's 220 calories. I basically just negated the calorie deficit I got from the treadmill. So just to put into effect the amount of power food has over you, where you just think, oh, just that one little brownie's not going to hurt. Well, that's a 500 calorie brownie, and you only did 30 minutes of cardio today. Guess what? Now you're up 400 calories for the day. So just kind of in that context, it's helpful to think about it almost as a trade, a scale, if you will, perhaps. But This doesn't mean I don't want you to take me out of context and think that if you have a 500-calorie brownie, you have to go on the treadmill for 2 hours to work it off. That is a really bad mentality. It's not a viable thing to think. If you're trying to lose fat and you have one of those brownies and you know you screwed up and you're 500 calories over for the day, all right, that's cool. Tell your coach. Don't have a coach. Don't worry about it. Rat next day. Do better. Don't make the same mistakes. Whatever led to that, the lack of sleep, maybe that's what led to it. Maybe you were at a special party you only go to once a month or something. Not a big deal. Have the brownies the once a month. You have to be happy too, guys. I mean, I have ice cream. I have pizza. I have food I want to eat all the time. I don't have it every single day. I don't have pizza twice a week. You know what I'm saying? I have it when I feel like it. And when I eat it, it tastes so much better and I truly enjoy it because I don't get it that way. But that's just my 2 cents on it. I mean, most people, I think, who have this kind of lifestyle think this kind of a way. But I know a lot of people getting into it, they have this kind of do or die mentality. And it's not a good way to be. You just should be shooting to be a little bit better than the self you were yesterday. You should be just trying to take care of your future self a little bit better, maybe 1% better than the day before, because you're really the only control you can measure yourself against. You're the only one with your life experiences. You're the only one with your advantages and disadvantages, your lifestyle, your house, your money, your things. So you got to use yourself as a control. And you got to basically just do better than yesterday, even if it's just a little bit. That's all. But anyways, back to the fat loss. Maybe touch on protein again. What are some really easy ways that protein can be ingested? Because I know you've had this issue with clients before. I think just about everybody has. I can't meet my protein goals. I'm having so much difficulty eating enough protein. I've heard it all the time. What do you recommend when somebody says I'm having trouble eating my protein? Well, you know what? Let me just tell you briefly what I recommend. I say your protein goal is 200, but you're only eating 150 grams of protein a day, and you're having difficulty getting the rest. Don't just suddenly try to slam and cram down another 50 grams of protein. Work your way up slowly over a period of a week or two. Add 5 grams a day, 10 grams a day slowly. So it's not uncomfortable. You don't get indigested, so it's not hard to do it. Even something simple like having a half a protein shake before bed, any of these things that helps with the protein. But what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, very similar to yours. If I'm a coach, and let's just use the example that you gave, if somebody's eating, I'll just change it to 100 grams, but 200 grams is the optimal amount. And on their own, they're going to get 100. With me, I'm going to tell them 200. But if I get them, again, they're struggling with that. But if I can get them to eat 140, that's still closer to optimal than what they would be doing without me. So I'm going to pat myself on the back as a coach and fitness professional and say, I've done my job. I've bettered your situation with the evidence and what you can comfortably do. And this is probably why I'm not a coach, but I would say if somebody's we got them to 140 and they're just struggling. And let's just say they've even failed on your approach, which is exactly what I would do. You don't have to slam down another 60 grams and 2 protein shakes. Let's try something minor. But if they failed at that, I would say, okay, I think that getting a higher protein, that would be optimal. What that's going to do is if you're in a caloric deficit, it's going to help you maintain your muscle mass. But if you are struggling with this, let's just put it on the table what we're doing here. You are not enjoying your life because you're trying to slam down all this protein. So that's the negative. That's what you're giving up. And what you're gaining is maybe you're not losing a couple grams of muscle, because that's probably what it is. Maybe you aren't losing fat quite as fast as what you could. I would rather say, okay, what is the level of protein intake that you can comfortably do where you're not stressed about it? You're not going to bed and, oh, I didn't meet my protein goal today. And let's just live in the world of accepting, okay, I might lose a little more muscle mass, but I'm able to enjoy my life. That person over 5 years will have a better physique than the coach who says you have to get 200 because that's what the science says. So I'm about getting them as close to the goal as possible that they can maintain comfortably.
At least for me, is my approach. I know I have a very unusual approach for a coach, but I truly prioritize educating my clients. because I really, truly feel you get the best results when they fully understand what they're doing and why it is the best way. And when it comes to something like this, I make it very clear that you need protein to build muscle. You need a certain amount to sustain your body function, etc. You get the idea. I'll stop there, but you get the idea. You need the protein for these things. And when you're not consuming this protein, it's not optimum. And I mean, I could keep going down the list. I mean, when you eat more protein, you feel more satiated and full. You don't want to eat as many carbohydrates and fats, and all these things. But eating a lot of protein is a really, really good trick and tip that you already mentioned. And it's a big one. But again, it's, in my opinion, most people, they fail because they just try to do it all at once. Somebody says you have to get this much protein, and then they try it really hard to do that, and they fail after a couple days because they just can't sustain it. And I've had just really amazing results with even if it's just on a weekly basis, add 5 or 10 grams. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to do it. There's little protein shots that are like yay big. You buy them at the gas station. It's 50 grams of protein just in this little tiny shot. Put it in your purse, put it in your pocket. Boom, done. It doesn't take up much room. It's digested very rapidly. Have a casing shake before you go to sleep. It'll keep you full all night and give you more protein. I mean, there's a lot of ways to do it. The thing is, I think most people just don't have access to these are actual viable, good ways to do it. And I should have enough protein because it is, in fact, this important. I feel like it's a bit neglected. Everybody seems to be all about the, either all keto or all vegan or all these things. That's, to me, it's almost irrelevant. What matters is the bioavailability of the protein that you're getting, making sure you're getting enough, and that your nutrients, your other carbs and fat are supporting you in the proper way. I mean, that's my take. But in regards back to the fat loss, let's just say that you are an athlete, you're a bodybuilder, you're getting ready for a fitness show, a photo shoot, a competition, etc. When do you start really cutting the calories? When should you kind of tighten the screws? How frequently should you cut the calories safely? These kinds of things. And I know it's dependent on the individual as well, of course, but is there a good method to this?
Well, one thing I would say, as soon as we admit that we're working with a bodybuilder who's got a competition date or photo shoot, we have to admit that the practices that they're going to implement are not sustainable. So we have, to me, there's a lifestyle client where I'm going to help. Hey, let's do things that allow you to do this the rest of your life. If it's a bodybuilder, we know they couldn't do this the rest of their life. They look great on stage for a couple of days after the show or going into the show, and then it's gone pretty quickly.
Extremely unhealthy. That's why I said extremely unhealthy to look like this.
Yes, yeah. Except for the genetic freak who just walks around lean. Again, there's 1 out of 100,000 people. I know him and very jealous. But
all of us.
Yeah, so for a bodybuilder, there is no way around not getting aggressive with low calories. They have to be very low body fat to be competitive in their chosen endeavor, in their chosen sport. So the one thing that has transpired over my lifetime or my professional life is a getting away from very aggressive 8-week or 12-week diets. And this is true even in the natural bodybuilding space. And it's now very common where there's a 26-week, half a year, 30-week contest preparation. Now you are dieting more than half the year, but it's a much slower rate. And what we've seen over the years is healthier outcomes in the natural bodybuilders. Not saying it's healthy, but healthier than what we would see in the past. And you're seeing a much more shredded natural athlete. And again, if we talk about enhanced athletes, they're just taking like the clenbuterol, they're taking the drugs to help with their extreme leanness. And they can tighten up their times a little bit. They don't have to be as elongated in their approaches. But I think a good model is, again, I guess this would be more of a philosophical model. You have let's just say it's a 30-week or let's just say 20 weeks to make things easy, 20-week contest preparation phase. What I like is kind of throwing in new stimuli over time. So an example would be, let's reduce your calories for the first 8 weeks. So your body's adapting to that, and your body eventually stops adapting to the reduced calories. So now I think let's throw in what was that other major tool? Cardio. Now let's add in cardio. It's a new stimulus for your body. Plus, cardio actually helps maintain muscle mass. A lot of people don't realize that. A lot of people think you lose muscle mass. Well, good luck finding evidence of that. You won't find evidence of that in the research literature.
I used to that, by the way, just to interject. I mean, I used to believe that until about 6 years ago, and I know a ton of people who still believe that, and they don't believe me when I explain it to them that it does. But I mean, sorry, back to you.
Yeah, well, we'll provide evidence when we publish our systematic review. Now, to be fair, males do lose muscle mass when they do cardio in their contest prep, but it may or may not be because of the cardio. It might be that they're eating 1,500 calories and they have huge amounts of muscle to lose going into it. Females, you won't find hardly any evidence that females lose any muscle mass when dieting. But again, the overwhelming majority of the research, cardio maintains muscle mass, does not reduce it. And again, we're assuming when you're adding it to resistance exercise. But even when you compare cardio to diets will cause fat loss and some lean mass loss. Cardio alone, it's almost all body fat. It helps maintain lean mass. So I'm with you. You were actually on the, if you've known this for 6 years, I don't think I've appreciated that until the last 2 years when I've done my deep dive. So hats off to you.
No, wasn't me. I was fortunate. Jerry Brainham, he was sharing that information with me. Well, most of the amazing things I know, I mean, I've just stumbled upon, looking for something else happening.
Yeah.
I just saw
no, but I agree with you. A lot of people are still ignorant to what they think is true about cardio. And again, I'm not saying you should be a cardio bunny. You shouldn't treat cardio as, doing 3 hours a day of cardio to lose fat. That will not have the body composition outcome that you would want. You'd get severely overtrained. I think at that point, you probably would lose muscle mass if it gets extreme. We're talking about normal, healthy levels of cardio, 45, maybe 60 minutes per day, a couple days a week, in conjunction with resistance exercise. So anyway, back to this philosophy. Diet for a while when your body becomes a little accustomed to that. Now let's throw in a new stimulus. That could be your a cardio program, 45 minutes most days of the week, walking on a treadmill incline or whatever they prefer. Do that for another 8 weeks. Now what? Oh, now we can throw in some of these fat loss supplements that your body has not adapted to yet. So I like this idea of adding in stimuli as your body becomes accustomed to the previous stimuli. And then you just keep grading downward in terms of your body fat losses. So that's, I don't have evidence of that. The one evidence that I do have of that is a Yohimbene study where this was in obese females. One group dieted without any Yohimbene. I think they dieted 6 weeks. The second group dieted for 6 weeks. And after 3 weeks, they added in Yohimbene and they had their rate of fat loss continued over the 6 weeks. The other group of obese females, they plateaued over the course of 6 weeks. So there's some evidence to this timing in your elongated diet phase of throwing in new stimuli, and specifically with Yohimbene in that one study. So now we're getting to this, like putting the pieces of the puzzle together, which I really like. It's like you have all these tools, and probably what I would do is if I'm working with somebody, I would start off with a plan of something like this, and then realize based on your feedback, based on how your body's responding, this will likely change maybe 180 degrees by the time we're at week 8 into this, or 14. As an example, if somebody's losing fat week after week after week after week on a food reduction, a caloric restricted diet, I would see no reason to change that. If it's working, I'm not going to, if they don't want to do cardio, I wouldn't add that in. I wouldn't give them supplements if they don't need it. So it's all the fun too of just getting the feedback.
I think probably going to be the last things that we talk about, but the effects of sleep on fat loss. I mean, I talk about this all the time, but I would love to hear your perspective on the effects of sleep on fat.
Yeah, so it's not an area that I've researched a lot. I am aware, and I'm going to say that most of my knowledge on this topic comes from other elite coaches. And what I've learned from them is if sleep is off, that almost always appears to cause a plateau in fat loss, or if stress levels are high. So if you can get control of stress levels, and if you can help sleep, that seems to keep fat loss much more linear as it can be, and it's not very linear. And again, this context here is in competing bodybuilders, a lot of females. I have looked at research or read research on lack of sleep blunting the anabolic adaptations to resistance training. So we know it's not necessarily, we know there are negative outcomes to lack of sleep on building muscle mass. And in terms of fat loss, not relying on the literature, but relying on coaches that I respect, it seems that if you can improve sleep, you also improve fat loss when in a caloric deficit.
I'll just briefly on the sleep, I guess I would say this, a couple of brief tips on it. Number one, if you're sleeping correctly, you'll burn more fat for several reasons. I mean, number one, if you're sleeping, you're not eating. Number two, if you're really, but seriously, you're sleeping,
makes sense.
if you're sleeping, you'll be recovering and repairing your body. And I mean, I can't understate this enough. Most people are nowhere near sleeping correctly or sleeping enough. Yeah, you should be sleeping something like 7.5 to 9 hours a night. That is 5 sleep cycles or 6 sleep cycles. A sleep cycle is a 90-minute cycle of REM sleep, stage 1, 2, 3, and 4. You'll kind of naturally wake up at the end of that before you enter another one. But you want to get 5 or 6 of those a night. I mean, I know scientists who sleep 12 hours a day. They think they have to get proper brain function. I'm not that smart. I don't know about that. But some people do. Now, also, when it comes to sleep, as I already mentioned earlier, but just briefly again, is when you undersleep, which most people do, a hormone called ghrelin is released, and it makes you, literally, it makes you hungry. It makes you think that you need to eat. You need these calories. So all you people who think you're badasses, you're high productivity, you only sleep 3 or 4 hours a night, you're just destroying your body. It is unsustainable. Your work, it's not going to benefit from it. You would actually, and I was subject to this myself for many years. I'd sleep 4 or 5 hours a night. I'm a badass. I'm going to work. My work, my productivity, my efficiency, my creativity, my ideas, my intelligence, my memory retention, everything went up 1,000% when I started sleeping 7 hours a night, 7.5 hours a night. And if I don't sleep correctly at night, I feel it. I notice the difference. My willpower is depleted. I don't want to do things. I'm not smart. I'm not feeling creative. I'm having difficulty regulating my emotions, all of these things. So it's just really important. Sorry for the tangent. I just think that's important information. And I suppose just the last thing, in regards to fat loss, because I do know you have to be going soon. Thanks again for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, thank you.
In regards to fat loss, what would I'd say put it this way: what are your best tips, all around tips in regards to fat loss? You take as long as you want to get these out there. I don't care. But what are your best tips for people?
The best tips would be a combination of caloric restriction and additional cardio to your resistance training program is a powerful stimulus for fat loss. And in my world and in your world, it's not just fat loss, it's trying to do everything you can to maintain the muscle mass while you're dieting, because that ensures longer term fat loss success, and it will prevent, at least theoretically, several theories, several studies would support this, it will prevent fat regain when the diet is over. The more muscle mass you can keep, the less likely you are to gain fat when your diet's over. So those two combined, and then I like to add in the higher protein intake when dieting. So one of the pillars of my fat loss plan is you reduce your calories, but you don't reduce your protein. At minimum, you keep it the same, reduce carbs and fat, and depending on if you're a sport athlete, careful with reducing carbs, but depending on what kind of lifestyle you live, reduce carbs, reduce fat, keep protein where it is, if not increase it. Add in cardio with your add in cardio to your reduced calorie diet. And that you're kind of giving your body every stimulus to reduce body fat. And then, of course, we can also add in some of these supplements that we discussed earlier if you need extra energy deficit. And one thing about caffeine that a lot of people don't know, it is a mild appetite suppressant. So in me, it's actually a pretty high appetite suppressant when I take it. Research doesn't suggest that it's a major appetite suppressant, but it is there. It's I would say moderate to low appetite suppressing effects of caffeine. So it's one of those things that works on both sides of the energy balance equation. It reduces calories in and it increases calories out. So that makes it a pretty powerful ingredient.
And by the way, I didn't mention this, but in the EAC stack, it actually the effect is like tripled or quadrupled the appetite suppressant. The caffeine works with the ephedrine to produce this really heavy appetite suppressant. I've had people who's just like, I haven't eaten in 7 hours, I don't want to eat. I'm like, well, you got to have a protein shake with some MCT oil or something, or you're gonna just crash. You have to eat. I just got to mention that. But I suppose the last thing I want to ask you, if you have any time left over to answer this as best you can, are you able to comment on the effects that I don't want to get into specific steroids, but let's just say steroids in general have on muscle sparing and dieting when it comes to fat loss?
I don't have. I mean, I'll answer to the best of my knowledge, but it's very cursory. My belief is that steroids are much more muscle sparing than without them. So you can be much more aggressive on your diet. And what you're doing with steroids, you're increasing muscle protein turnover. Muscle protein synthesis is elevated. In terms of dosages, amounts, types, I'm not qualified. Now it's funny, when I was young, I loved steroid physiology. It's kind of what got me into this field. Like, I used to know all of the chemical structures, and then over time, I've just more focused on the dieting and the exercise component than the anabolic steroids. But it is a fascinating science.
I think I'm kind of going through there right now because I was obsessed with steroids for a long time. Ironically, I didn't mess around with them. I was actually researched for 6 years before I ever tried them. But I've experimented with quite a few different compounds, but it just seems to me that they're not really all they're cracked up to be. They're not really worth it if you're a competitor or an athlete and you're paid to do these things. You know what I mean? They're definitely a good idea. If you're an actor, you have to look a certain way. Yeah, absolutely. I think that they're a good idea. I think that they're safe if you know how to use them and you don't use the more damaging ones like Trem, which would melt your brain. That's not really what it does, but I mean, it does kind of, and some other things. But I'm much more interested in just getting people healthy and enhancing them naturally. And the more I learn about that, the more it just seems to me like these steroids, again, they're pretty much magic. They're really amazing, but they're also really unnecessary, I would say, for most people. Again, unless you're paid to look a certain way, or you are a bodybuilder, or you are an athlete, or you require healing in a certain area, or these things. But they're good for that. I just don't think that the average person who wants to be big and jacked needs them. What they do need is patience and consistency and the correct knowledge. Not a lot of effort, not a lot of time, not a lot of money, not a lot of drugs, not a lot of supplements. Just patience, consistency, and the correct knowledge. That's my opinion, anyways. But Bill, I really want to thank you for coming on here, and I really want you just to take a second and please plug yourself again, because I use your resources. I learn from you constantly. I mean, whether you know it or not, I always appreciate your work. I love what you do. It's right up my alley. And if you could just please plug yourself again real quick.
Yeah, well, thank you for the kind words. If anybody wants to stay on top of the physique research, building muscle, losing fat, you can go to my website. It's Bill Campbell, PhD.com. You can download the inaugural issue of my Body by Science research review for free to see if it's something you like. If you do like it, for now, I'm offering it at $6.99 per month. The price will go up after the launch period. Somebody asked me, how soon is that? And I was like, well, I haven't decided yet. So I don't know. I'm thinking at the end of August, if I had to guess. But yeah, it will keep you informed of the most recent and historically best fat loss, muscle building research. And I also bring in expert coaches, physicians, researchers to help apply the findings to people. And sometimes they don't agree with how I would do things. And I love when that happens, because I love differing, just a different approach to this same topic.
Thank you so much. So we'll have you back on soon. Guys, make sure you check out Bill's stuff. And thank you so much, bud.
Thank you.